Sarah Curry had just arrived from India. She leaned her head against her father's shoulder, and their carriage clattered through the London streets. The yellow fog hanging over London made the day as dark as night. She was shocked at the contrast between the hot country she had known all her life and the cold one she had come to. "Papa," she said, "is this the place?" "Yes, little Sarah," he answered. "It is." Sarah's mother had died when Sarah was born, and she had always lived with her father. Sarah had known that she would be sent to school in England when she was old enough, and at 7 she finally was. They drew up in the front of a big dual house with a brass plate that read, "Miss Minchin School for Young Ladies." Captain Crewe lifted his daughter from the carriage and they went inside. "I don't like it, Papa," Sarah said. Everything was square, hard, ugly, and unfriendly. When Miss Minchin came in, Sarah felt she suited the house. She looked unfriendly too. "It will be wonderful to have such a beautiful and clever student," Miss Minchin said. Sarah thought it was an odd thing to say, as she did not think herself beautiful, and Miss Minchin did not yet know if she was clever. Captain Curry said that Sarah was to have everything she wanted, including her own maid, carriage, fine clothes, and the best rooms. Sarah told Miss Minchin that her best friend would be Emily. "Who is Emily?" Miss Minchin said. Sarah replied that Emily was a perfect doll, but she did not have her yet. "What an original child," Miss Minchin said, smiling at her coldly. Sarah stayed with her father in his hotel while he was in London. Every day they went shopping to buy her beautiful clothes with frills and furs and feathers. They went from shop to shop in search of Emily, until at last they found her. And then they brought Emily lots of lovely clothes too. On his last day, Captain Curry took Sarah back to Miss Minchin's and said goodbye. She sat at the window of her lovely rooms watching until his carriage was out of sight. Miss Minchin sent her sister, Mrs. Emilia, to see what Sarah was doing. But she had locked the door. "I want to be quiet by myself, if you please," Sarah said. Miss Minchin was relieved that Sarah did not shout and cry as she had expected such a spoiled child to. And although she thought Sarah's clothes ridiculous and she looked forward to showing her off as the richest pupil in school. The other girls at the school had heard about Sarah's arrival, and there were rumors about her lovely clothes and luxurious rooms. They all turned to watch as she walked to her place on the first day of lessons. Miss Minchin introduced Sarah to the class, and then said, "As your papa was employed a French maid for you, I expect he wants you to learn French." She gave Sarah a simple book of French words. I have not learned French, but," Sarah began. She wanted to explain that her mother had been French, but Miss Minchin stopped her. "That is enough. It is time to begin." When the French teacher arrived, Miss Minchin told him Sarah was reluctant, but Sarah spoke to him quickly in perfectly fluent French. Madam," the teacher said to Miss Minchin, "there is not much I can teach her. She is French. Her accent is delightful." Miss Minchin was furious that Sarah had made her look foolish. From then onwards, she didn't like Sarah. A sad-looking, plump girl called Ermengarde watched the drama unfold, anxiously chewing her pigtail. Miss Minchin soon told her off, and Sarah felt sorry for her. She later learned that Ermengarde's father was always disappointed in her, as she was not very clever. Sarah promised to help her, and Ermengarde cheered up considerably. And is it true, Ermengarde asked, that you have our own playroom? Yes, said Sarah. I make up stories when I play, but I don't like people to hear. Sarah took Ermengarde to her room to meet Emily, who Ermengarde thought the most beautiful doll she had ever seen. Sarah told her she liked to imagine that when no one was around, dolls could move and talk and act just like little girls. Ermengarde spent the happiest hour of her entire life in Sarah's room. Sarah was always kind and delightful and generous to everyone around her. But her good fortune annoyed two people. One was Miss Minchin, who thought her spoiled, but useful for showing off as a star pupil. The other was Lavina, who was jealous of Sarah. She had been Miss Minchin's favorite and the most popular girl in the school before Sarah arrived. The younger children especially loved Sarah. She was kind about her troubles and tantrums. If you are four, you are four, she said to Lavina, who had slapped little Lottie and called her a brat. But soon you will be too old for silly tantrums. One day, Sarah heard Miss Minchin and Miss Amelia trying to calm Lottie, who was wailing, I haven't got Mama. The two women were cross and despairing in turn, and it didn't help at all. Sarah asked if she might try to calm Lottie. Instead of fussing, she sat quietly while Lottie cried. At last, she told Lottie that she didn't have a mother either. She promised to be Lottie's mother while she was at school. Lottie quickly calmed down. Sarah had been at Miss Minchin's school for 2 years when she caught sight of her dirty, smudging face watching her as she went to her carriage dressed her in furs. That evening, she saw the very same girl come into the schoolroom carrying a box of coal. The tiny servant girl spent as long as she could making up the fire so that she could stay and listen as Sarah told a story about a mermaid. All the girls, even Lavina, could not help crowding round to listen Sarah's stories in the evenings. When Sarah noticed the girls listening, she raised her voice so that the servant girl could hear more easily. All at once, the girl dropped a brush. That servant has been listening, said Lavina, but Sarah did not mind at all. She believed that stories belonged to everyone. Later, Sarah discovered that from her maid, Merity, that the little girl was Becky, the lowest servant in the house. Becky was always sent to run errands in the cold. She was always hungry and filthy from making up the fires. A few weeks later, Sarah came back from the dance class dressed in a rose pink dress with real matching roses in her hair. She opened the door to her room and found the little servant sleeping in a chair in the front of the fire. "Oh, cried Sarah when she saw her. "You poor thing!" Becky always saved cleaning Sarah's room until last, as it was the prettiest and was full of lovely, interesting things. But today she was so exhausted that she had rested for a moment in Sarah's soft, comfy chair, and then fallen fast asleep. When Becky opened her eyes, she saw Sarah in a beautiful dress. "Oh, miss!" she cried, straightening her cap and jumping to her feet. "I didn't mean to. The fire was so warm, and I was so cold and tired." Sarah put a hand on her shoulder and laughed kindly. "Ain't you very angry, miss?" Becky asked, afraid that Sarah would tell Miss Minchin. "Why, no," Sarah said. "We are just the same. I am only a little girl like you. It is just on accident that I am not you and you are not me." Becky did not really understand, but Sarah sat her down, gave her some cake, and began to chatter to her. Becky said Sarah's dress made her look like a princess. She told her that sometimes pretended to be princess and always tried to be half like one. Then she told her more of the mermaid story Becky had overheard. She promised to tell her a bit more of the story every day if Becky came to her room after she finished her work. After Becky had gone, Sarah murmured to herself, If I were a real princess, I could give money and presents to everyone. As a pretend princess, I shall be kind to people instead." A little time later, a letter came from Captain Curry, explaining that he was investing in some diamond mines with an old friend. It was going to make him very rich. Everyone in the school was excited, except for Lavina and her friend Jessie. Lavina didn't believe there were such things as diamond mines. Jessie told her that she'd heard Sarah liked to pretend she was a princess, and they both laughed spitefully. "I suppose she'd think she was a princess, even if she were a beggar," Lavina laughed. When Lavina and Jessie mocked Sarah, she told him that pretending to be a real princess helped her to be kind to people. Sarah saw Becky every day. She began to buy Becky's treats to eat as she was always so thin and hungry. Slowly, Becky grew plumper, healthier, and happier. She was made to work harder as she grew stronger, but she felt she could put up with anything because she could look forward to spending time with Sarah at the end of the day. And when it was nearly Sarah's birthday, a letter came from her father. Captain Curry was unwell, but he sent instructions to Miss Minchin for Sarah's birthday, and said that Sarah must choose a doll. Sarah said it would be her last doll, as at 11 she was almost too big for dolls. Miss Minchin bought all the things that Captain Curry asked for: the doll, fine clothes, and a birthday tea. When Sarah's birthday arrived, the whole school went into Miss Minchin's sitting room for the tea party, and Miss Minchin made a speech about what a wonderful pupil Sarah was. Miss Minchin saw Becky listening and tried to send her away. "Please, may Miss Becky stay?" Sarah asked. Miss Minchin was horrified. "But she is a schooling maid," she said. However, to please Sarah, she let Becky stay. Sarah opened her presents. She had books, clothes, jewelry, and the beautiful new doll. But just then, Miss Amelia came in. Sarah, your papa's lawyer has come to see Miss Minchin, she said. So you must all run around. You must all run along. Everyone rushed away, but Becky stayed to look at the presents a moment too long. Just as she was about to leave, Miss Minchin came in with the lawyer, Mr. Barrow. In a panic, Becky hid under the table, and from there she heard everything. Mr. Barrow told Miss Minchin that the diamond mines had failed, and Captain Curry had lost all his money before he died. He dead! Cried Miss Minchin. Yes, and he lost every penny he had. He was already ill with jungle fever, and he heard the news about the diamond mines, and the shock killed him. Sarah left the penniless and your care. Miss Minchin turned white with rage. I have told, robbed, and cheated. I will turn her out to live in the street, she shouted. I wouldn't do that, madam, Mr. Barrow said. It wouldn't look good for the school. Better keep her and make use of her as a servant. Miss Minchin called Miss Amelia and told her to tell Sarah the news and send her to put on the black dress. Then she sat and considered how much she had just spent on Sarah's birthday, money that she would never be paid back. When Sarah appeared in front of Miss Minchin a few years later, her face was white with dark rings under her eyes. She had listened to the news from Miss Amelia without speaking, and then ran to her room where she repeated over and over, My papa is dead! My papa is dead! Now she stood, clutching Emily as Miss Minchin told her she would have no time for dolls in the future. She would work as a servant and do nothing as she was told. You are a beggar now, not a princess, Miss Minchin said. You have no relations, no home, no one to take care for you. You can stay here, but you must work. Sarah ran from the room, but Miss Amelia stopped her going into her own bedroom. This is not your room now. You must sleep in the attic next to Becky's room, she said. As she closed the door behind her, Sarah's heart sank. This was another world. The room had a slanting roof with a skylight, and whitewash was peeling off the walls. There was nothing but a hard bed and a few pieces of battered furniture. Sarah sat on a footstool, laid Emily over her lap, and cried. After a short time, there was a tap at the door, and Becky came in. She, too, had been crying. Oh, Becky, Sarah said, I told you we were just the same. You see how true it is? I'm no princess anymore. Yes, you are, Becky cried. Whatever happened to you, nothing could make you different. The first night Sarah spent in the attic was a night she never forgot. She felt sadder than she had ever felt in her life. She tossed and turned, trying to get comfortable, and whispered over and over to herself. My papa is dead. The wind howled in the darkness, and Sarah heard snuffling and squeaking in the walls. She knew it was mice and rats. She lay trembling, with the covers pulled over her head. Sarah's life changed all at once. Her maid, Matrie, was sent away, and from the very next morning, Sarah had to sit at breakfast with the smallest children and help them. She was sent on errands, and the chores helped on her by the servants, who rather enjoyed ordering around the girl that had been forced to make a fuss over before. For the first few months, Sarah thought that if she showed willing, the servants might be kinder to her. But she soon realized that this wasn't true. They simply gave her more tasks and scolded her. She no longer had lessons, but studied alone at the end of the day. She was afraid she would forget what she had learned if she did not study. Miss Minchin didn't like Sarah to talk to the other girls. To think that she was the girl with the diamond mines, Lavina scoffed. Doesn't she look odd now? Sarah worked harder than ever. She tramped through the cold, wet streets carrying parcels and grew sappier and more miserable every day. She had to eat her meals downstairs with the servants. Although her heart was breaking, she told herself, "Soldiers don't complain, and I shan't. I shall pretend this is a war." There were times when Sarah thought her heart might break of loneliness if it were not for her few friends. Becky still helped Sarah whenever she could. And one day, Sarah went up to her attic room at the end of the day and found Imangrid there waiting for her. Imangrid looked around the tiny, bare room. "Oh, Sarah, how can you bear living here?" she asked sorrowfully. Sarah started to feel a little more like her own self, like old self, as her imagination began to work. "If I pretend it's quite different, I can," she said. "Or if I pretend it is a place in a story." Lottie was also a good friend to Sarah. She was too small to understand what had happened, and Sarah didn't want to tell her. But one day, Lottie climbed the stairs to Sarah's room to find out for herself. "Sarah!" she cried, horrified that the room was so bare and ugly. Sarah was worried that Lottie would make a fuss and be discovered. "It's not so bad," she said quickly. "Look, you can see all sorts of things from the window." She showed Lottie the view from the skylight and the tiny sparrow, hoping that they feed some crumbs to the sparrow. And Sarah helped her to imagine how lovely the room could be if there were a fire in the great and comfortable furniture. When Lottie had gone, though, the room felt cold and empty again. "It's sometimes the loneliest place in the world," Sarah said to herself. At that moment, she heard a little sound and looked up. There, sitting sniffing the air, was a large rat. "I dare say it's rather hard to be a rat," Sarah said. "Nobody likes you, but it's not your fault you were born a rat." She sat very still, and eventually the rat crept up and ate some of the crumbs that Lottie had dropped on the floor. Sarah decided to call him Miss his deck. Lick his deck and make him a friend. After all, she thought, prisoners make friends with rats. When Sarah had been rich and finely dressed everyone had admired when she went out. Now, no one looked at her at all, and feeling invisible made her lonelier than ever. Instead, she watched other people. She liked to look into one nearby house in particular. It belonged to a family she called the Lodge family, because there were 8 children. One day, as she watched them into their carriage, one of the boys turned towards her. "Here, poor little girl, here's a sixpence for you." Sarah suddenly realized that she looked just like the poor children on the street. She didn't want to take the sixpence, but she saw it would make the boy happy. So she did. She thanked him so politely that the Lodge family children were puzzled. "She can't be a beggar," one of the girls said. They were so interested in her after that they watched out for her and called her the little who is not a beggar. Sarah made a hole in the sixpence and hung it around her neck. The house next to Miss Minchin's had been empty for years. Sarah longed for someone to move in. How nice it would be if a friendly head could pop out of the skylight next to hers and wish her good morning. Then one day, she saw men carrying crates and furniture into the house. Some of the furniture looked Indian. What a lovely sight! That night, Becky came to Sarah's room with the news. "It's an Indian gentleman," she said. "He's very rich, and he's ill, and the father of the Lodge family is his lawyer." It was a few weeks before the Indian gentleman moved in. He had no wife or children, only a nurse and 2 servants. He looked sick, was very thin, and was always wrapped in furs. Some time later, Sarah was standing on the table, looking at the sunset out of the skylight, when she saw a head at the next window. It was a brown skin and wearing a turban. She smiled at the man, and he smiled back, but as he did so, he accidentally let go of a little monkey he was holding. It ran across the roof and jumped through Sarah's skylight. Sarah had learned to speak Hindustani when she lived in India, and spoke it now to the man to ask if the monkey would let her catch him. The man was called Ram Das, and was the servant or Lascar, and as they were sometimes known, of the Indian gentleman. They decided it would be best if he crawled across the roof and caught the monkey himself. Despite the shabby ethic, Ram Das treated Sarah with all the respect she was used to from her servants in India. After he had gone, she thought about what had happened. She straightened her thin little body and said, "Even I am dressed in rags and tatters, I can still be a princess inside." Sarah grew fond of the new gentleman next door, even without meeting him. She learned that she was English, but had lived in India for a long time. He had fallen ill after some bad luck with diamond mines. In turn, the gentleman, whose name was Mr. Carrisford, learned a little about Sarah. The children of the Lodge family told him about the little girl who is not a beggar, said, and Ram and Ramdas described the adventurer with the monkey. He called his lawyer and father of the large family, Mr. Carmichael, over for a talk. Hearing about the poor girl next door has made me worry that curious child. The child I never stopped thinking about could be in a similar state, he said. If the children is in Paris, as you believe, I am sure she is well looked after, Mr. Carmichael replied. I am not sure she is in Paris, he worried. I only think that because her mother was a French woman. I must find her. Curie was my oldest friend, and his child might be begging in the street. He put every penny he had into the diamond mines, and he died thinking I had lost his money. Come, Mr. Carmichael reassured him. You are ill at the time, too, and could not tell him the mines had had a change of luck or ask about his daughter. We shall find the child, and you will have a fortune to hand to her. I have a new lead. I will travel to Moscow, and look for her there. The winter was bleak, and Sarah suffered cruelly. One day, she found a silver coin in the mud. Sarah was hungrier than ever, and crossed the road to the baker's. But on the way, she spotted a bigger child with eyes even hungrier than her own. Sarah bought 6 hot buns and gave 5 of the buns to the cold and starving child. She is hungrier than I am, she said to herself. When she got home, she saw the children of the large family saying goodbye to Mr. Carmichael as he set off to travel to Russia. If you find the little girl, father, give her our love, shouted one of them. I wonder who the little girl is, thought Sarah. While Sarah had been out, Mr. Carrisford asked his secretary and Ramdas to sneak across the roof and go into Sarah's attic room. They measured and took notes and saw how shabby it was. Do you think it can be done while he sleeps? The secretary asked Ramdas. I can move as if my feet were velvet, he replied. They slipped away, and when Sarah returned that evening there was no sign they had never been there. She was late for dinner, and the cook gave her a piece of stale bread. As Sarah climbed the steps to the attic room, she saw a light under her door and found Emengrid waiting for her. Sarah was glad. But Emengrid did not really understand how terrible Sarah's life was. As Sarah and Emengrid talked, they heard Miss Minchin shouting at Becky for stealing a meat pie. Becky was muttering that she hadn't stolen the pie, though she would have liked to. She was so hungry. Emengrid opened her eyes wide in horror. Sarah, are you ever hungry? Sarah just too tired and to pretend. Yes, she said. I'm so hungry now, I could eat you. Emengrid jumped out. I'm so silly, she cried. My aunt sent me a box of lovely treats to eat. I'll go back to my room and get it. Sarah went to fetch Becky, and they pretended that they were decorating a huge banquet hall. When Emengrid returned, they spread all the wonderful things to eat on the shawl that served as a tablecloth. Suddenly, Miss Minchin burst into the room. white with anger. She hit Becky and shouted at her. "Go to your room immediately!" She made immigrate take the treats away and told Sarah she would have no food the next day. Sarah gazed at her, saying nothing, and this angered Miss Minchin. "What were you thinking?" she demanded. "I was wondering," Sarah answered, "what my papa would say if he knew where I am tonight." "You insolent child!" Miss Minchin shouted, shaking his violently. "Go to bed this instant!" As Sarah ran sadly to bed, a head peered in unnoticed through the skylight. Sarah lay down to sleep. Imagine she had soft, downy pillows and fuzzy blankets. When she was woken a little while later by a sound, she felt too warm and snug to open her eyes. She was having a delightful dream that she had covered with a satin quilt, and she didn't want to wake up. When at last she did open her eyes, she couldn't believe them. "I am still dreaming," she whispered. She was covered by a satin quilt. A fire was burning in the grate. A little kettle hissed on the hob, and a thick, warm rock lay on the floor. There were blankets and a little folding chair and table. On the table, a wonderful meal was spread out, with a teapot ready to be filled. She touched everything, and it was real. There was even a note read, "To the little girl in the attic," from a friend. Sarah rushed to Becky's room and dragged her over to see the wonderful changes. They had a feast of soups, sandwiches, muffins, toast, and a tea. And it was all real. "Do you think it would melt away, miss?" Becky asked, cramming a sandwich into her mouth, just in case. At last, warm and fed, they shared the blankets between them and both went back to the bed. If it ends here in the morning," Becky said as she went off to her room "at least it was here tonight, and I'll never forget it." But everything was still there in morning, and as the day passed, more and more wonderful things appeared while Sarah was out or sleeping. Delicious hot food, enough for her and Becky, arrived every morning and night. The weather got worse and worse, and the cook sent Sarah on the errands outside. Lavina sneered at Sarah's clothes, which got shabbier and shabbier. But Sarah remained cheerfully happy in the knowledge that she had a secret friend watching out for her somewhere. Miss Minchin had expected Sarah and Becky to be miserable after she had told them off for eating immigrant food, and she was puzzled that they were both increasingly cheerful. They even seemed to look better fed and healthier, though they were given so little food it shouldn't have been possible. Miss Minchin took this as an insult. "Sarah Curry looks well," she said to Miss Amelia. She was becoming suspicious. How could Sarah look so healthy on such ill treatment? A few days later, Sarah went to answer a knock on the door. A man handed over a pile of parcels, all addressed to the little girl in the right-hand attic. As Miss Minchin was passing, she told Sarah to take the parcels directly to the girl they were for. "They're there for me," Sarah said. Miss Minchin looked at the label looked at the label in confusion and told Sarah to open the parcels. The parcels were filled with the pretty, comfortable clothes, including shoes, stockings, and a warm coat. There was a note pinned to them which read, "To be worn every day, will be replaced when necessary." Miss Minchin was disturbed and worried. Could she wondered, have been wrong about Sarah? Perhaps the girl had some unknown rich relative. A rich relative would not like the way Sarah was not being treated. "Well," Miss Minchin said, you had better go and put them on. No need for any more errands today." When Sarah walked into the schoolroom, half an hour later, the other pupils were stuck down. They were even more surprised when Miss Minchin told Sarah to sit in her old place. "Perhaps the diamond mines have appeared again," said Lavina bitterly. That night, Sarah had an idea. Among the things that had appeared in her room was a writing set. So she wrote a thank you note to the kind friend who was leaving her presents and left with the tea things. The next evening, the note had gone, but something else appeared. Sarah and Becky heard a scratching at the skylight. It was the monkey again. Sarah let him in. It was far too cold for the monkey to be outside, but too late to take him home. "I shall let him sleep with me tonight, and take him back to the Indian gentleman tomorrow," Sarah said. The next day, the Lodge family were at Mr. Carrisford's house, awaiting the return Mr. Carmichael from Moscow. He brought bad news. "She is not the child we are looking for," he said. "The girl I found is much younger than Captain Curry's daughter. The search must start again," Mr. Carrisford said. "She must be somewhere," said Carmichael. "Let us give up on Paris. Let us start in London. There are lots of schools in London," Mr. Carrisford said. "There is a sad little girl in the one next door. She is as unlike the Curie girl as any child could be." At that moment, Ramdas came in to say that the little girl from the next door had just arrived. "Your monkey ran away again," Sarah said, stepping into the room. "Shall I give him the Lascar?" "How do you know he is a Lascar?" asked Mr. Carrisford, astonished. "Oh, I know what Lascars are," Sarah explained to him. "I was born in India." Mr. Carrisford sat up suddenly with a strange expression on his face. Sarah told him that she had been brought to Miss Minchin's as a pupil, but when her father died, she had been left a beggar. "How did your father lose his money?" he asked. "He had been a friend he trusted too much," Sarah replied. "His friend took his money for the diamond mines." Mr. Carrisford could not believe his ears. What was your father's name?" he asked. "Tell me." "Rutherford Curry," Sarah answered. "Is it the child?" "The child!" he cried. The whole story was tumbling out. Sarah learned that Mr. Carrisford had not cheated her papa at all, but had genuinely thought he had lost all the money. He had fallen ill with fever, and by the time he recovered, Captain Curry was dead. Mr. Carrisford had been searching for Sarah ever since, and all the while I was just the other side of the wall, whispered Sarah. At that moment, Miss Minchin came in. She had seen Sarah go into the house and had followed her to apologize for the disturbance. She's not going back with you, Mr. Carrisford said sternly. Mr. Kermichel explained everything to Miss Minchin, who felt it was just worst thing that had ever happened to her. When she heard that Sarah was, after all, to inherit a huge fortune from the diamond mines. She made one last attempt to win her back. Her father left her in my care, she said. If it weren't for me, she would have starved in the street. She would have better off in the street than starving in your attic, Mr. Carrisford said. Sarah, how would you like to live here with me from now on? Of course, Sarah gratefully accepted Mr. Carrisford's offer. Miss Minchin stormed home to find Miss Amelia, but Miss Amelia turned on her. I am always afraid to say things to you, for fear of making you angry, she said. But you should have been less severe on Sarah Curry. She was a good child, and too clever for you. She thought that you were hard-hearted, and that I was a fool. And all the time she behaved like a little princess. That evening, the other girls in the school found out what was going on. Immigrate brought in the letter from Sarah that explained everything. There were diamond mines, she said at last. When Becky went up her attic room that night, Ramdas was waiting for her with the letter. She was to move Mr. Carrisford's house and live with Sarah. Sarah did not forget what it felt like to be poor. The next day, she asked to go to the shop where she had once bought 6 buns. The woman in the shop remembered Sarah giving away 5 of her buns to a hungry little girl. Sarah said that she would like to pay for bread and buns for all the poor children who came to the shop from then onwards. Do you know where the little girl is now? Sarah asked. Why, she's here. She works for me, the woman said. Then let her be the one to give bread and buns to the poor children, Sarah said. And as she said, Mr. Carrisford rode away in the carriage. Sarah felt happy.